start the recording. And so that's what I'm doing. Roxanne, welcome. So we are part 9. So as a big baseball fan, it's the 9th inning. Whether we go into extra innings or not on we're discussing Reb Zalman's Jewish with Feeling, we'll see, because next Wednesday night we will not be talking about the book, because for those of you who signed up for the Jewish paper cutting workshop, that is what's happening. And if you're going to be there for that, remember that it's at 7 o'clock, not at 7:30, because by 7:30 we'll already be gluing. So get there early. It is my delight to welcome Eve Ilsen. Eve is waving to everybody. I don't know where she is in your screen. Eve, how do I describe thee? Let me count the ways. I'm not going to say anything to embarrass you, but everybody knows that you're Reb Zalman's beloved, and that I described you originally as a chanteuse, because that's how we met. We met over the piano. Richard was playing piano. Cantor Richard, Chazan Richard, and he plays beautifully. And you were singing with him, and I was jealous. And so I looked for a moment to sit down at the piano when you were around, that you would quite possibly might come over and start singing with me, and you did, and that was the beginning of our friendship.
You remember what we sung?
Oh, I don't know, but I do remember that after that, you would bring sheaves of sheet music and say, play that. Or do you know this? Do you know that? And so that is the way that I got on. We were talking before about how I got on Reb Zalman's radar screen. Well, that's how I got on your radar screen, Eve.
But I also seem to remember you doing stand-up comedy.
Okay. So yes. And that is how I got on. And that was the question I was going to ask you, if you remember how I got on your radar screen, because that's how I got on Reb Zalman's radar screen. Without going into a long story, it was during Ohala, which Renee likes to call the convention for non-conventional rabbis.
Perfect.
And I think it was either my second or third time there. So I had already met some people, but didn't know a lot of people. And on one of the nights of the convention, there was a cabaret. And I signed up for the cabaret, and I knew I was going to tell a story about when I was in a professional Jewish choir as a kid. What I didn't know was that morning, Reb Zalman was going to do a tikkun. And I'm not going to go into anything about what that was about. But after he spoke to us all, we were unable to go on because everyone was either already weeping or needed a break. And Reb Marsha said, everyone go for a walk around the block and let's meet back here in a half hour. So that entire day was filled with just a lot of carryover from what Reb Zalman downloaded to us that morning. So when the evening came, people really needed a release and a relief from that. And I was lucky in that I was like the second or third person to go. There were several other people who sang very sincere songs before me, that brought people into Kavanah. And then I told the story, which I must admit is hysterical. Maybe someday we'll all be together and I'll be able to tell it to you all. I can't tell it on the Zoom screen because it really needs an interaction with everybody hearing me and me hearing you. But God willing, we'll all be together someday. In any case, Reb Zalman, I'll never forget, belly laughing. And the place was in hysterics, and it was kind of like a release of energy that needed to happen. So it was that night, Eve, that I got on Reb Zalman's radar screen because he didn't know me from Adam or Chava. So thank you for bringing that back into my memory. So tonight we're going to do what take the form that Joel and I did on the first night that Joel was here, Joe Siegel, which was I'm going to do the play-by-play, and Eve, unbeknownst to her, she's going to be the color commentator. In other words, when she's got something to chime in, she's just going to holler on me and say, Mark, I got my 2 shekels to say about this, that, and another thing. But there'll be times when I will ask you some questions directly, Eve, as well. I'm going to stop talking for a bit. Tell everybody where you are, and I mean, geographically, and
I'm glad you specified. I'm in our house in Boulder, and I can give you a peek what it's like outside. Does that work?
It looks like a spring day. Is there still snow on the ground?
It's very green. There was still snow on the ground until about yesterday. But it comes and goes. It's not like it's still because it was here for a long time. We may still get some more.
Okay.
But it's a very beautiful day.
Nice.
And you have to know that I'm in the neighborhood that is still reeling from the attack of the shooter in our neighborhood market. And the whole neighborhood still really feels this. They cordoned the area off with a chain link fence, and that became the scaffolding for the memorial things that people put up that completely coated the equivalent of 3 blocks, I think, of chain link fence. They're going to be taking that down sometime soon, but a lot of it will end up in the Boulder Museum. So all of these things are juxtaposed. It is a beautiful spring day. My housemate downstairs, whom some of you may know, Nathaniel Miles Yepes, has just constructed a raised bed outside, so it looks like we're going to be growing some stuff. And his wife Jamila is really into growing some stuff this year. Mishka the cat is taking a nap. And the place is peaceful with still the reverberation of the violence that happened a month ago.
So, Eve, we pray that maybe some of the joy from tonight will just be a little bit of salve for you to take into the world with you in this very challenging time. It's like challenging times on top of challenging times.
Oh, yes.
So
If it fits, before we end, Rabbi Mark, if it fits for you and for the Kahal, maybe we can say a Kaddish for those who don't have anyone to say a Kaddish for them, both from that attack and from other disasters this year and from COVID.
Amen v'amen. We'll do that, Eve. So after we'll count the Omer, and then we'll say Kaddish. How does that sound?
It sounds good.
Great. So the chapter that we're going to delve into tonight is Nu, why be Jewish? Why be Jewish? And Reb Zalman touches on the secret, quote unquote, of spiritual survival. And this chapter and other chapters mention his meeting with the Dalai Lama, where, of course, the Dalai Lama wanted to know, what's your secret of how to live in exile? So I have a question, Eve, that one of I think it's Reb Zalman's last or next to last book on the December Project. He talks about different calendar months being equated with different stages of our lives, and that the December Project, of course, was written in his last years. And I'm actually proud to be mentioned in the book. No one's ever mentioned me in a book before. Had something to do with...
not be the last time.
Well, yes, for good reasons. I'm curious, share with us, what months were you with Reb Zalman? In other words, from September on, when were you together? When was the beginning of Eve and Zalman? And I'm wondering whether you can trace for us up to the December years how if there was a secret of his spiritual survival.
Well, you've wrapped about 5 questions there into one.
Okay. Yes, I did. Take any one.
We first met in the 70s when I was a graduate student in the Bay Area. And he was doing, I saw a sign, High Holiday Services, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, with the Aquarian Minyan at the American Baptist Seminary. I thought, that's for me. And that's I think when I first met him. And I don't remember whether it was the first year that he did that or the second, because of course I came back. But what I'm remembering very clearly is that it's late afternoon on Yom Kippur, at that time when you're really ready for it to end because your body chemistry is going, no, no, no. But it's not ready to end. It's going to drag on for quite some time still. And people are sprawled on cushions on the floor and draped over chairs. And Zalman is still going, and we're all joining him, but the energy is really low. And suddenly I see his eyes light up, and he's looking out the big window. This is at the American Baptist Seminary in Berkeley, and he says, Oi, Kinderlach, you're about to have a great treat. And I look out, and what I see is this tall, stately woman with dark, long hair in a black embroidered Palestinian dress. And next to her, maybe up to her shoulder, in the middle, between shoulder and elbow, is this tiny little man who looks like an apple doll. Those dolls they make out of dried apple? And that's exactly what he looks like. And he's in a white galabia and a white turban, and he's holding bells. And Reb Zalman says quickly, as they're coming up the stairs, now listen, I know that most of you are probably not accustomed to addressing the Ribono Shel Olam in the Avodah, in the afternoon service of Yom Kippur, by the name of Allah. But I assure you, it's the same one. And I heard him say that, and I thought, I can really trust this man. He knows. And this sheikh, who was from a refugee camp, came up and led us in a zikr for the Avodah service. And that was the first time I met Reb Zalman. I don't think he was being called Reb Zalman yet then. They were just calling him Zalman. And I remember thinking, this is one of the few Jewish leaders that I know or have met who really knows that when you say Hashem Echad, it doesn't mean our God's the only one. It means one. And he would say Echad, one, Yachid, Umeuchad. Meuchad can be translated as special, but it also means unifying. It's the one who ones us all. And he made that very clear that first time I was ever at High Holidays with him. I've never forgotten it. And then there was, of course, a gap of many years when I didn't know him. But when I came to know him again and to know him better, I really learned that he not only really knows it, he really means it. This oneness was real for him. It wasn't just from the neck up. It was really embedded in his whole being. And so he was able to transmit that when you were in his presence, when he was really celebrating. Mark, I don't know if I answered your question because I no longer remember your question.
I don't care. Because what you just shared with us, Dainu, good night, everybody. It's been beautiful. That's exactly what I want you to do. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Whatever he asks you, just answer whatever comes to your heart. All right. But you have raised some, actually, the next thing, it was a perfect segue, which is in talking about triumphalism, is on page 184, because you just shared with us that you can trust this man because he's talking about something much greater. And in this chapter, he goes into how to be particularistic without being triumphalistic. And
Yes.
then, and
That's what was so unique about him, because even if he adopted or borrowed practices from somewhere else, they were never inconsistent. He was always utterly rooted in the tradition, in his Judaism, where he came from.
and that always, of course, shined through. Even when he would say, he likes to go to the mosque or a church to see how others get on with their God.
Yeah.
But in saying that, and in this chapter too, he talks about everything starts from love. That that is the yearning that is shared across traditions leads to the same place. That's the name of Matthew Fox's book, right? Many rivers, many path, one river, many rivers, one path. What's the name of the book? Somebody help me out. It's in the other room. Anyway, there's many ways to get there, but there's just there's one river, right? There's one river that runs through us. Okay, to paraphrase a movie from long ago. So he brings us, and so here's a question, because I don't remember in talking about triumphalist language. I think, if I remember correctly, in the bracha, for instance, before an aliyah, what would Zalman say? Did he change it from time to now? Okay, actually, let me back up to make sure that we're all on the same page here. The traditional bracha for Aliyah is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushenu bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu, so on and so forth. So it has the word bachar banu in here. So it's the word of chosen us. So bachar banu mikol ha'amim, right?
From among all
From
the other
among
people.
all the other nations. So I don't want to guess. I can guess, but I'm not going to. But what did, and so is everybody with me here? Do you know? Do you get how problematic that is through a Jewish renewal lens, and also through a Reconstructionist lens? Because if you are going to a Reconstructionist show, they're going to say "Kervano la'avodato." They skirt around the whole the choice issue, whatever. They've changed it to from chosenness to being of service to, right? And we can all agree on that, which is why when we used to get together, for those of you who were with Moshe, right? Remember the old days? We used to actually get together in the same place. That's the bracha that we use for Kirvano La'avodato. So Eve, please, what did Reb Zalman use, and why?
What he would usually do is what he used to call a Teflon change. So he made this little change that made the essential difference in meaning or translation. But if you weren't listening very carefully, you wouldn't hear it at all.
Right.
So he would say most of the time, Asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim,
Right.
who chose us, along with all the other people. He chose us for this, he chose them for that. It was a sort of recognition that each major religion and ethnic groups had their specific characteristics, just like each of the children in one family is going to have his or her own specific characteristics, along with the things they have in common. So he recognized both the specificity that comes with the Asher Bachar Banu, who chose us, and the universality, Im Kol Hamim. He chose us, he chose them for that, he chose them for that, he chose us for this. And the picture is that among all of us, with all our great variety, we are part of a greater whole. And we don't dissolve into the soup. We have our specificity within that greater whole. Does that?
Yes, it does. And actually, your use of the term, which I hadn't heard before, a Teflon, what did you say? A Teflon?
Oh, he would say, I've made a Teflon change.
Okay, so
You
he
know,
does the same thing with Aleinu. Now, I don't know who wrote about it, but Aleinu l'shabeach ladona kol lateit gedula yotzei shelo asanu kegoyeh haratzot. So that who
and
didn't.
he put Shelo asanu im goyeh haaretzot, and he did two things. So the original translation is, who did not, Shelo asanu, who didn't make us like the other
Other
thing.
nations.
Kilo asanu, that's the same. Shelo asanu ke goyeh haaretzot, as the other nations. And there are two.
I know one of them, one of the changes that he
Yeah,
made.
lo is a homonym.
There you go. So
Lo
instead
is
of.
one of these words that can have two spellings with two different meanings, but they sound the same.
Mhm.
So shelo asanu, who didn't, is lamed aleph. Didn't, it's no. Lo, no. Shelo asanu, lamed vav, means his, who made us his, along with all the other nations. So his intent here was to be able to have it slip by an ear who isn't listening carefully, but make it possible for those of us who don't think in exclusivist terms to say without lying, without saying something we don't want to say.
Mhm.
Have
Right.
I been clear with that, or did I just get
Yes,
more
no, that's it. So
confused?
that's the Teflon answer. It's an answer that he makes an adjustment so that his theology is authentic to him. For
Yes.
those who understand where he's coming from and can pick up on the nuance, they know where he's coming from. And for those who are who are in automatic pilot,
They won't even notice.
not going to notice. Dan Glazer, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I'm just curious of why that's better than simply stating the the alternative, like the Reconstructionists do. Or why make it subtle enough so that some people can be fooled into thinking that maybe you don't really hear the, why not say, I don't believe in this. Let's change it.
I think because he was much more of the thought that you widen the vessel rather than narrow the vessel, so that people who are in many different states of development and many different kinds of opinions still have a home there. And so he doesn't want it to be in your face. He wants it to be there if you're looking for it.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And the result of that is that there's a really wide spectrum of people who have relationship of some sort with Jewish renewal. Some are, right over the edge of Orthodox in their practice and to some extent in their theology. But if they're attracted to Jewish renewal from an Orthodox place or in an Orthodox place, it means that they're looking to widen the room to be able to include more while maintaining Orthodox practice. What I noticed when did I first meet Reb Zalman? It's when I was in my 20s and in graduate school. And I cannot begin to describe how happy I was to find a Jewish place where I didn't have to make all sorts of adjustments in my mind in order to be able to stay there. He made it possible, and he widened the room, and he widened the mind. Now, I was already in my 20s very familiar with mysticism and mystical practice, and he made it possible for me to stay and find that in a Jewish context, which I could not do anywhere else unless I would have wanted to behave and take on a lifestyle that was much more orthodox than I was ready to do. And then after enough years, they might let me in to the secrets of the mysticism. This is This is somebody who made it accessible and sparked enough questions that I wanted to keep learning. Now, I should tell you who referred me to him. Who referred me to him was my adoptive father, my mother's second husband, who was a conservative rabbi in San Diego. He was a JTS graduate, and he also knew me very well. And he's the one who said, you know, anything Shlomo or Zalman are doing, you'd like that kind of stuff. And he was right. Boy, was he right. He was much righter than either of us knew.
Did that mean,
me too.
did that mean that he didn't like it, but he thought you would, or that?
He liked it also, but he was very firmly a conservative rabbi. He was, I think, one of the youngest or the youngest students in JTS to receive smicha. And he'd grown up in the Bronx, and his parents were both from Europe. And so I would say that for a conservative rabbi who was very firmly in that theology, he was very open and very humane and very wise. And along the edges, a little bit would look at mysticism. And my mother and I were both always interested in mysticism, so we were always poking at him and challenging him to open more. So he knew what he was saying when he said, you would like Zalman. Of course, neither of us knew to what extent at that point. But
Thank you, Eve. And thank you, Dan, for the question. Rachel.
I also love that he changed the law from with Lamed Aleph with Lamed Vav. I think it's very thoughtful for people that just starting to come to this to his synagogue and his belief, because they take it easy. You know, it doesn't in your face. You can't do this, and we don't like this. So when you pray, it sounds the same. So I think it's just easier for people to come to his synagogue and to him.
I agree, because you could continue davening, and if you had an issue with what about all this chosenness stuff, he had embedded in there something that you could chew on.
Right.
We have that problem as a family when on Shabbat somebody says the Kiddush, and depending on who it is, it's either in the Reconstructionist format, which pisses some people off, or in the traditional one, which pisses the others off. And so it's sort of back and forth, and and then we feel bad if we go along with the other side, you know, like you're saying, you know, it's not as much a whole room inviting as it is. We're better than you, and you're better.
You know, would you like to hear what I imagine Zalman would have given his homework for that? He would have probably maybe said something like this. Well, let's go through the Kiddush and see what issues are being dealt with in each set of sentences. You know, the creation of fruit of the vine, which is an acknowledgement of nature, and go through what all the issues are. And then he would probably ask people to compose a sentence for each of those that they could really say in honesty, and collaborate with that and see how much collaboration is really a possibility. That may be taking on more work than a particular family might want to enter into. On the other hand, there's some families that might take that as a really delicious challenge. And I'm not sure whether I've helped anything or just thrown more confusion into the mix.
Well, Eve, you'll just have to go to their house for Shabbos dinner sometime and see what the machloket's all about.
Where do you live?
We're in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Well, It'll be a while, but you never know.
There
Yeah,
you
what
go.
was really interesting is like I come home from like being at Ohala or from being at davening leadership or from being at Hashbah, and then they can't figure out who I am, because besides Reconstructionist and conservative, then there's like what is she up to? But you know, but it fits. I mean, like we say that. I mean, like everything fits. Like people um it does fit together, but I would love to do an exercise like that. That would be really interesting. Maybe even around the Seder table, we could do it around something or.
But you know what Reb Zalman would often do is he would take a look at whether it's the service or the Haggadah and see what are the main elements that we're dealing with here. Okay, we're dealing with fruit of the vine, we're dealing with our relationship to God as a people, we're dealing with the land. What would if we were writing the titles of the paragraphs, what would those be? And then take a look with what can this group of people, this mixed group of people, actually say that's part of the tradition for this paragraph that we could pretty much all say and nobody feel that they're lying. It is a real challenge, but it's an interesting and creative one.
But just even the general themes of creation, redemption, and revelation. I mean, that's through the service. Yeah, that would be a fun exercise. Well, I don't know about fun.
Well, but therefore you've just assigned yourself something, and what I would add to that is let it be fun, because in the time of COVID, we really can't afford to take on anything more heavy.
Amen.
Right.
So speaking of fun, are we having fun yet? Excellent. The first time I met Reb Zalman, Eve, I think this story is important to insert in here because of the spirit of playfulness and inquiry that Zalman brought to everything. In other words, when you talk about discussing, let's say, a family opening up a prayer and seeing what works, what doesn't work, how can we reconcile these things? If you put that alongside what you talked about of him expanding the camp, expanding the vision, which led, of course, to so many different parts of the Jewish world that now most people don't know that you can trace Echo Kashrut back to Reb Zalman, or the reclamation of Jewish spiritual direction back to Reb Zalman's dissertation, right? All of this, and what you all experience as Jewish renewal is as a result of years and years and years of being, and as Judith talks about all the time, of being in the sandbox, right? Of being in the laboratory, based upon a recognition, an identification of what the ikar, what the essence of a ritual is, the essence of a prayer is, an essence of a season is, the essence of Shabbat for you, right? Okay, so the first time I met Reb Zalman, I was in Philadelphia, and he was leading a service, Germantown Jewish Center, somewhere upstairs somewhere. I don't know where I don't think it's where Reb Marsha meets now. But here's what I remember. I remember he was there, and keep in mind, I'm coming from a very conservative, big C Jewish background. I don't know anything about Jewish renewal except for the fact that everybody calls it Judaism light, right? Reb Zalman's there, Art Waskow's there, Phyllis is there. Of course, I remember Phyllis because you have to remember Phyllis when you see her because she's so striking physically. And there was a minyan, maybe 15 people. I honestly have to say that I left before the Torah service because I was so creeped out. I didn't recognize anything in that service that resonated with me and my Jewish background. jumping to years later, where I'm considering going to the Daven and Leadership Training Institute. But first, I'm not going to make that commitment without meeting the leaders and seeing what they're up to, because I've already experienced Jewish renewal and I didn't want that. I went and davened with Reb Marsha and Jack. And it so happened I gave Reb Marsha a ride back to DC. She had to be back in DC. And I told her the story I'm telling you. And she says, that makes sense. Because Zalman would talk about at that time, they were throwing the baby out with the bathwater in order to see what they could reclaim, to see what kind of rituals they can come up with that really, really spoke to the kishkis, using some of the same liturgy, but maybe there was a zikr in there too, which I would never have known what was going on with that. So us being together at Moshe, Eve sharing with us everything that you're sharing with us, allowing yourself to really expand your consciousness so that you can, for yourself, locate the "you are here" sign in your personal mall. Your personal shopping mall, right? From the beginning of the book, Reb Zalman talks about it's like a big shopping mall. We have so many choices, right? We're all Jews by choice. Why did we end up with Jewish renewal? Because of the work that others have done, and that we are continuing the work. We are continuing in the tradition of everything you're sharing with us tonight, Eve, which is so important for us to hear, because how many of you, I didn't ask this question, I was going to say at the beginning, how many of you met Reb Zalman? Janice, I know. Meira, yes. Esther Klein, I don't know your story, but you did share that with me. And Susan Freiband, of course, has been to many Ohala. So less than a fifth of us, or about a fifth of us, met Reb Zalman. And now we're learning the way that we learn from all of our teachers, right? Through what they left behind, and they're teaching still. Anyway, that's my Devar Torah for tonight. But I wanted to share with you my meeting of Reb Zalman, because it wasn't all roses. It wasn't, "Ooh, isn't this groovy?"
Tell us more.
About that experience? Well,
If you would.
the experience when I finally went up to meet Reb Marsha and do a Shabbos morning at Bnei Or, was I had come home. What did that mean? It meant that they were davening and they were jamming. They were reaching a golden point of what the rabbis always had in mind, which is a sweet, perfect balance of kavanah and keva, right? Of understanding that we're working with a beautiful piece of music written by Lerner and Lowe, right? But then what we do with it when it turns into a jazz suite, right? And then come back to the theme, that's Jewish renewal at its best. Okay, so that's the more that I have to offer. That and it was a Judaism that it was a secret, Eve. No one ever told me. No one ever. I don't think it. I never was. I never experienced anything like that. The old saying: if you want to show a non-Jew what it's like to be a Jew, bring them to Purim or a wedding, right? With the joyous moments of Simcha. But I never knew that could also be experienced at Jewish renewal. What did I know about Jewish renewal? But there with Reb Marsha and Chazan Jack, I was riding the waves really of ecstasy. They were davening. I was davening something completely different. They were chanting. I was grooving on the music. I was dancing in shul. Oh, God forbid. When did anybody ever do that? Okay, must speak.
But that's what the Hasidim did.
Of course. But we didn't know
and I'm sure that the Balabatim of their towns, when Hasidism first began to grow, thought they were really weird and really wanted them out. Behave yourself. What is this?
So I'm going to pick up on that, Eve, on page 185, because in the conversation about triumphalism and particularism, Reb Zalman tells the story, right? I'm like the fifth line on page 185. It's one big paragraph. In the early days of Hasidism, the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov would reach a certain level of spiritual attainment with one Rebbe, then continue their study with another. Reb Shneur Zalman, the first Lubavitch Rebbe, learned from the Maggid of Mezrich, but also learned from Reb Michal of Zlochev and from Reb Pinchas Okoritz. In my day, though, the Belzer Hasidim would say none are truly for God except for Belz. So why am I reading that? And the Lubavitch thought the same of themselves. Each chassid seemed to march on the slogan of one God, one Rebbe, one wife. So what is he saying there? Even we are guilty of triumphalism within our ranks. All right? My God's better than, not just my God may be the same as yours, but my Rebbe is better than your Rebbe. Right? My Rebbe is better than your Rebbe. And that's something that did not work for Zalman. After a while, somehow he woke up from that, and he looked around and saw. I mean, was it the moment that the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent him and Shlomo out into the world as shlichim? I mean, when did he wake up to, like? Can you point to something?
I think it began happening way earlier, because his father sent him, on the one hand, to Beitar, to the Zionist youth, and on the other hand, to the Hasidim. So from youth, he was being exposed to extremes within a larger whole. There are some people who would not have picked it up and responded as he particularly did. I mean, none of his siblings went with it where he went with it. He had two sisters and a brother. So he was fortunate. There were the Zionists and the Hasidim. And here's the story he used to tell about when he came back to it. They barely made it with their lives across the border into Belgium. And he found a job as he was a young teenager, helping with diamond cutting. And he tells the story that it was they were all Hasidim by the diamond cutters, and there was a microphone, and everybody had a button. And somebody would be sitting at the front of the room reading from Hasidic text as they were cutting diamonds. If somebody had a question, they'd press the button, everybody'd stop, and he'd get to ask the question, and it would continue. So there was this admixture of religious practice in everyday life.
Right.
But the other story he tells, and this is interesting, is that they had made it across the border into Vichy, France, when Belgium was being invaded. And they ended up in an internment camp, which is not a concentration camp, but it's still not fun. And finally, and he was bitter, they finally were released, and they made it down to Marseille, where they'd hoped to be able to get a boat out of Europe. He was spoiling for a fight. Some of you may have heard this story. And he went to what was clearly a yeshiva, and somebody was reading about the afterlife. He said, I stood near the door because I knew I might have to run. And I yelled, pie in the sky when you die. It's nonsense. It's lying. And the kids were ready to beat the shit out of him. And the teacher said, come in. Do you want to see somebody who agrees with you? Which completely astounded him. And he took out Maimonides, who also did not have a literal, reified view of God. And that is what started Zalman learning again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will tell you an interesting sequel. This teacher's name was Baruch Merzel. I remember hearing about him. And there was a time I was in Israel getting the rest of my stuff together to come back to the States because I had been living there. And Zalman came. And I knew somebody whose last name was Merzel and asked Yankele Merzel, is anybody in your family named Baruch? And he said, yes, it's my uncle. And Zalman got to meet his old teacher again. He was still alive. And that one teacher who was able to say, you have a point, it's a good point, let's expand on that, changed everything. If the teacher had cut him off there, who knows if Zalman would have done any of what he did the rest of his life with the rest of his life.
Eve, I don't know if I ever shared with you that Renee once sat down with Reb Zalman at Ohala and asked him if he knew the Brockfelds. Why did she ask him? Because Renee's family's from Antwerp, and they were diamond people.
And did he?
No. It doesn't surprise me. He was a teenager.
Yeah.
So unless he was working specifically with them, his ears would not have been that big to know the larger diamond world in Antwerp at that time. My father-in-law, who's still alive, he's 96, 95.
No.
Right, Reb Zalman's age. He tells a different story about leaving Antwerp. The Nazis came in one end of Belgium, and they left by cab. They left the other to leave, and they made their way to Marseille also, where my father-in-law met the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had these big dreams about what was going to happen when he got to the States.
And they did.
And they did, absolutely.
That's where Zalman met the Lubavitcher Rebbe also.
In Marseille.
I think so.
Yeah, that would make sense. But my father-in-law tells a different story in that he was never one for music, but his parents made him take violin lessons, and the first thing that went through his mind on the day that he had his violin lessons, which was the same day that the Nazis came into Belgium. Oh, good! I don't have to take my violin lesson. But they had a very hard time. They were in Marseille for a while before they could book passage to. They eventually came to Mexico, and then the family went back to Belgium after the war. And Renee's dad stayed. He came to the States, but that's a different story. But Zalman didn't know them. But it's interesting that the diamonds that's where he found. And I knew that story. I don't know how. He must have shared that. Maybe he shared that with Renee, that they used to used to study Hasidic text.
Yep.
To sharpen the mind while they were sharpening their blades, I guess.
And he also would make the mashal that it's a very noisy and uncomfortable process to cut the facets into a diamond, but it's the only way that it will really shine and show light. And so he likens that to what we need to do with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. All the mashpiyim in the room, the spiritual directors. It goes for everybody. But would you repeat that, Eve? Because I think, especially when we get to, every day it's right there in the theology of our tefillot. But especially when we get to Yamim Noraim and sharpening us and working on ourselves, and especially for our spiritual directors to keep this in mind of something to say. Would you say it again, Eve, please, about what you said?
I'm not sure I can. It's one of those things that comes out when it's called for and might not do it again. How do you remember it?
Somebody about how when you're working with diamonds? Go ahead, Roxanne.
I wrote it down.
Great.
Okay. It is a very noisy and uncomfortable process to cut the diamonds, but it is the only way to make them shine.
And what a diamond does is it does not shine its own light. It's clarified and made more complex so that it reflects the internal light.
Beautiful. Roxanne, would you send that to me, please? And I'll share it with everybody who's here. I think it was last week or sometime in the past few weeks, I couldn't pronounce the word organismic.
That can get you in trouble, yeah.
It can get you in trouble. The same way I didn't know how to pronounce deep ecumenism when I first saw the word ecumenism.
Yes.
But in any case, this is classic Zalman. Let's look at page 185. It was the same place. And clearly, and wonderfully, we're not getting anywhere near the end of this chapter tonight, which is great. In the second paragraph to 185, on the bottom of the page toward the end, if you're on a tablet. If we think of a world as an organism, then triumphalism is a cancerous attitude. The cells of triumphalist organs want to go wild. They want to spread themselves so much they will consume all the other cells in order to glorify that which is them. This is clearly not the way to go. We who do not share this hardline thinking sometimes go to the other extreme in coexisting with other faiths. We're living in the modern world. We are one global community now. We no longer want to see the world in terms of us and them. Of course, we need a little spice to life, so we'll keep our Hanukkah candles. They can keep their Christmas trees. But let's get rid of this archaic stuff that's kept us fighting for so many centuries in the name of religion. Okay. Then the next paragraph he says, but this too would homogenize the organism. To give up our own special way of being misses the mark. I believe there's a lot of mileage left in the contribution that we Jews and other religions as well have to offer the world. And I think this too speaks to what we're doing at Moshe, that we are together co-creating and discovering what that is. What is it that is worth carrying on? How do we understand Torah through a modern lens? How do we upgrade and update our operating system, again borrowing from Reb Zalman's love of computer language? How do we continually do that and stay charged, stay inspired, stay passionate, stay God-centered, right? What texts are inspiring us? What are you studying? This is not up to me alone. This is up to you, right? Everything now is available in English. What does this Rebbe have to say about that? What does Reb Zalman, right, David, have to say about? But Reb Zalman's not the only one.
No.
There's wonderful, wonderful teachers all over. Somebody mentioned Hadar tonight, right? I think it was you, Judith, about the melody that came out from Hadar that I think Janice is going to maybe share with us. Yes, and Rabbi David Cooper, of blessed memory, God is a verb. I had an opportunity finally to study with Reb David, the last Ohala that was. That's a whole different story. But that's a book. David, hold it up. You want another Rebbe? Buy that book. You'll love that book. God is a verb. Only for the stories, Dayenu, you'll love the book. But Reb Zalman's fingerprints are all over that book. Right? Okay. Next page. Oh, no. So here comes the word. Go ahead, Eve.
I think this may be a time to, maybe I should ask you all who are listening not to repeat this out of this group. Do I have your agreement?
We are very
used who aren't nodding.
Yeah, Eve, we are very used to maintaining confidentiality in this group.
Okay. I'm sure he also wrote about this somewhere, so it's somewhere public, but just in case. And it was his image, I think it was the first time he did LSD. Mm-hmm. And the image was that he was in a hot tub with a bunch of other religious leaders, and each one had the hat on the head identifying from which tradition they were. Was it a kefiyah? Was it a yarmulke? Was it a, and all these different faces, different races, clearly representatives of different religions. And at some point in his image, in his trip, he dips his head under the surface of the water of the hot tub and opens his eyes and sees that beneath the surface with all the different heads, it is all one body. It is all one body. And I think that is a useful image to play with. Because what is it that we mean when several times a day and right before bed we say Hashem Echad? The very primitive, the kindergarten meaning of that is, our God is the only one. But that is clearly a very immature and very primitive meaning. The real meaning is far more expanded than that. And that is the thing that I saw that Zalman understood the very first time I met him when I was still a grad student in the Bay Area. And that was consistent and deeper and deepening all the time that I knew him.
Here is that image underneath the water written down in a different way. The Dalai Lama's vision was neither triumphalistic nor what we might call homogenist, but organismic. What happens in a living being? The skin and the bones, the heart, brain, lungs, liver, and spleen all have different functions, yet they are all connected. No life can survive if one of the vital organs are gone. When we look at our planet itself as an organism, we realize that every expression of diversity on this planet is part and parcel of Earth. At the highest level, we are all Adonai Echad, we're all one. So they're the same thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was lucky enough, I think, that he really could get that rush of seeing the unity between the smallest units that we can measure of our physical materiality, all the way out to the largest, to the galaxies. And I think he was able to do this now and then without being stoned.
You know, he talked a lot about how he was changed by seeing the first pictures of the Earth taken from outer space.
Yeah.
Anything you want to? Any thoughts about that? And the Gaia and the living, breathing planet, and that we're not separate from anything, including our home, which is the Earth.
Yeah. The only thing I have to say about that is the beginning of a song that Susan Osborne of the Paul Winter Consort would sing. And I'm sure you've heard it also. It starts like this. You and I on a small green island, spinning round and round in space. And the small green island is a living being, and we living proof of her grace.
Zalman wants you to know that was beautiful, Eve.
Everything is glare.
Oh, sorry. How about that? Is that any better? I'll take a picture. If it's a photograph of Zalman and Reb Aryeh.
Here's a
Reb
beauty.
Aryeh's wife gifted. Judith, that's a nice one. Can you see
This
the one
is
that
by
you?
Connie Ryder,
Yeah.
of blessed memory. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge where I am right now. First, in just with so much gratitude, Eve. I would not be sitting here if not for Reb Zalman. Reb Zalman would not have been Reb Zalman without his teachers and tracing his lineage back to the best, the Baal Shem Tov. There are moments when I literally feel that he's looking over my shoulder, but not only that, that I'm channeling him.
Ah.
Even sometimes when I'm teaching and of something of his, and one of his expressions of how he would say, do you hear what I'm saying? You hear what I just said? Is that beautiful? There was like just a Zalman like turn of phrase that in the book that Joel wrote sounds like him talking to us. It's not like some kind of, treatise.
Yeah.
In any case, that the gift came from a man, and the man was your husband.
And he had also been husband of 3 women before me, and he
Yes.
has 10 children. He's
Yes.
the father of 10 children and the donor for an 11th. And the pole star, sort of the place where everything gravitated around in so many communities. I have no idea if he had any idea what he was getting into in this incarnation or what he agreed to, but he did a magnificent job.
Amen. Amen. I'm careful now. No, I'm not careful. It comes very natural that Reb Zalman is now passed over 5 years, is it? Or is it longer this summer?
He went in 14.
So it's 7 years. It'll be 7 years. And so maybe it was about 2 or 3 years ago that I started saying, Reb Zalman teaches that, as opposed to Reb Zalman taught, as in the way that we honor all of our teachers. The Rambam teaches still. And Eve, you've brought him here for us tonight. You have more than channeled his presence. You've done some magic.
Halavai, he deserves it. If I've been able to bring any of his flavor, I'm grateful.
I want to leave a few minutes if anyone has any words of any comments, questions, words of gratitude. If you want to take a moment to, my invitation before was to locate yourself, right, in your life of Jewish renewal, or maybe this one thing from tonight that you're taking away. A word, a phrase, a teaching, a feeling. Let's do that. And if you have something, raise your hand. I'll call on you. one takeaway for the night. Rachel, please. I'll unmute you. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
I said, I'm in love with Eve. I want you to come here and be in my house.
Where is here?
North Carolina, right outside of Asheville. It's not snowing.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you, Rachel. Haf.
So I should say, if there's a community that wants me to come and teach a weekend, when it's safe to travel again, I'd love to do that.
Great, great. Haf, please.
Yes, Eve, I wanted to say that I appreciate all of the wives, the children, the grandchildren, and all the other tentacles that Reb Zalman had. And we are very, very grateful in this community that he flourished our own Rabbi Mark, because Rabbi Mark is always really mentioning, living, feeling, and just continuing the lineage. So we're very, very grateful for that.
As are we all, because Rabbi Mark, not unlike Reb Zalman, expresses himself in many different worlds. It's very robust and rich.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you, Haf. There was another, Deborah, and then Judy. Judy.
I think I have a new appreciation for echadness.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Judy Young.
I feel like we should say Kaddish de Rabbanan. I came into this class late because I was in a class with David Ingber.
Oh.
And in that class, he probably mentioned Reb Zalman 3 or 4 times just tonight. So I am so grateful to Reb Zalman because he's the teacher of my teachers, including Rabbi Mark, of course. And yeah, so thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Judy. And that's a wonderful idea. We were going to say Kaddish as an ending, but Kaddish de Rabbanan is perfect. So if you have the text, grab it, because it's a tongue twister. But I'll lead it, and you'll catch up with me when we come back to the parts that are most familiar. I saw 1 or 2 other hands up. Yes, Phyllis.
Yeah.
And then Roxanne.
Yeah, hi, Eve. From one girl's high girl to another, we had a little interchange on the emails.
Oh, yes.
The 214. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was awesome. And I do hope we can get you out east to our synagogue at some point.
Amen. I'd be very delighted. I'm
Amen.
beginning to itch to feel useful again.
It's so useful. Thank you.
Roxanne.
Hi, Eve. That you would sing for us was very, very sweet to me. That it was such a gift. Thank you so much. It felt so loving.
You're so welcome.
Let me see. Carl, and then Dan and Mary Rita.
So first of all, I was in class Monday night, and we read the story about Reb Zalman cutting diamonds and studying Talmud at the same time. That was in one of the books, or one of the things we were reading. And but what struck me tonight is I never met Reb Zalman. My first experience of Jewish Renewal was Kala in 2016. But as I registered for it, my rabbi recommended that I read Jewish with Feeling. And she's a Reform rabbi in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and she recommended that I read Jewish with Feeling.
Wow.
So I read it before I went to Kala, and that's, what struck me when we talk about all the different places that this comes from, when Eve, when you talked about your father-in-law, I think it was, who was a conservative,
My adoptive father.
your
My
adopted father, who sent you from the conservative side, and I got sent from the reform side, and and we all come from such different backgrounds.
And
I
there are
will
some
also
who
say,
actually even show up from the Orthodox community.
yeah, I will also say that the first time I went to Panay Or, I actually sat and said, "Who are these crazy people?" They all got up and
That's a
started. First of
reasonable
all,
response.
I put on a nice pair of slacks and a nice shirt, and I was so overdressed. It was amazing. Um, and then I'm sitting there, and people start getting up and dancing, and I'm going, I'm not sure I'm in the right place.
You're in the wrong room.
But by the end of the morning, I was home, and so thank you for reminding me of all those things.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you all for reminding me.
If I don't want to be a tircha, but I think everybody's holding on. Nobody's going to run out. So Dan, Mary Rita, Judith will have the last word before my last word, before Eve's last word.
I think Janice wanted to say something also.
Who did?
Janice. She had her hand up before.
Oh, okay.
But no, I am latched on to the diamond, whether it's a metaphor or the image, in two ways. At first, I was thinking about it, when you say it's the process is rough and difficult and noisy, but it's the only way to help it shine. I was thinking more about the individual, about myself, and that what we need to go through, whether it's the narrow places or through the struggles, to get to a place where we can find our light, or at least have the light go through us in relationship, in increased complexity and brilliance, like you mentioned. So I really liked that. But then I also started thinking about the diamond from the ecumenical point of view, where a diamond from the oneness point of view, and that the different religions are just different facets to look at the same thing. And they all have their different coloration, a different aspect of it, but they're all looking at the diamond. And they're all valid and they're all important, but they're all looking at the same thing. So that intrigued me also.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan. Mary Rita, Janice, did you want to? Why don't you wait till after Mary Rita, and then Janice and Judith, you can duke it out.
So Eve, thank you so much. This morning when I was meditating, I felt like Reb Zalman was here. Back, Reb Sean led us in a guided meditation. I think it was in the summer for my second Hashba'ah intensive. And I met Reb Zalman in the cave, which was one of the last steps on the journey that he led us. And I was back in that cave this morning, but I feel like I am sitting, if we could be, that we're in the same room. And I was remembering January 2020 was my first Ohala, and I met you in the corridor, and you were so welcoming. And at that point, I'm pretty new to Jewish renewal, so I didn't know that your connection with Reb Zalman. I just knew just the beauty of the love that came through your eyes as you welcomed me, and we just talked really briefly. I want to thank you for just the way I have experienced Reb Zalman tonight again, and I think what I'm taking with me is the diamond, that metaphor, and so touched Dan by what you just said. I have this dream that at some point I'm going to be sitting down somewhere with Reb Zalman, and I want to really talk about from a deep ecumenism perspective. I grew up Catholic. I'd been a Catholic nun. I am now in Judaism, found my way to Jewish renewal finally, at a time when I'm supposed to. And I leave tonight just with a whole lot of joy. So I thank you. And I hope you do come east, wherever you are, when you can travel. Please let us know, because I'm going to be there. Dan, we're going to follow wherever Eve is, so we can also learn from her in person.
It would make me very happy to be useful again.
Or when we are person to person at Ohala pretty soon, hopefully, or Kala.
God willing.
Amen.
But the other thing I want to say, and I'm sure that Reb Zalman would say something like this too, is how fortunate it is that in some traditions, such as the Catholic tradition, the energy of the Shekhinah, of the feminine aspect of God, is given real space, as it is in the form of Mary. And it's still true that most Jews in the normative denominations have no idea. If you gave them the word Shekhinah, they would not know what you were talking about. So that's the gift that comes over from your original tradition that we need to unfold more.
And Shekhinah is what led me to Judaism, to really take that step, because I was longing for, that was.
It's a very interesting word, because let's take it down from Shekhinah. We know what it means metaphorically. Shachen means neighbor, and konen is like the stick that you put in the ground that says here. I'm planting it here. So it's all having to do with the influx of the undefinable divine coming into and making form, which is a very essentially feminine job, as it were. So I'm just putting that out to play with.
Thank you.
Janice, Judith, bring us home.
Yes, it's so wonderful to have you in this community, because I actually my main residence is right near Eve and Reb Zalman's house. And I was in Boulder for the last years of Reb Zalman's life. And I really want to thank you, Eve, in the deepest way from thousands of us, because you took such good care of Reb Zalman, and he would not have lived as long as he did if it wasn't for you. And yeah, and I saw it with my own eyes. I had such a blessing to sit at your table and go in the basement with him and daven. It's just so many fun things that were so, gosh. But anyway, thank you, Eve. Thank you. And this is my favorite community, and because I'm also originally from the Maryland, DC area. So I hope you come back. And as I've been telling you, the davening, because Reb Mark does keep Reb Zalman's spirit alive every week, many times. And many of us old timers come through or stay, like Janice and I, for example, because the davening is so uplifting and so wonderful. So I hope we'll see you on a Shabbat morning when you wake up early one of these times. So
Thank you.
And I do want to say to everyone, put Kala July 2022 on your calendars. And I think we'll take a group from Moshe and we'll go as a group to Kala. Maybe we'll get a discount, Mark.
I can see the bus now.
Exactly. And Eve, you'll be there for sure, because it's going to be in Fort Collins, Colorado. So,
God
okay,
willing.
friends. And then, so do you want to do the Kaddish Rabbanan, or Janice sing the Omer?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is, Janice, did you want to say something, or you just were going to want to share the melody for the Omer?
I was just going to say how great it is to see you, Eve, and to hear you sing. That was just such a great treat. And of course, I've read Jewish with Feeling half a dozen times, and had the privilege to learn with Reb Zalman. Judy and I were both at the program with David Ingber earlier, and we were talking about how we are B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God. And like you, Deborah, it was through Reb Zalman that I first began to see myself as created in the image of God and connected to all of creation. And which is when I say Hashem Echad, is I see myself connected to the larger picture of all people and all creation and all the larger picture of the earth.
Thank you,
that's
Janice.
No, I may have misheard you creatively because I heard you saying creative in the image of God.
That too. So let's say Kaddish, as Eve, when we got on together before, you had a specific kavanah, but now we also have the fact that we all studied together, and in Reb Zalman's name and lineage. So let's say Kaddish first, and then because I want to leave with music instead of Kaddish. Alrighty.
So remember, Kaddish is entirely a song of praise.
Amen.
So it's a praise for this person for whom we're saying Kaddish, whoever it is.
Kaddish, or are we saying Kaddish de Rabbanan?
Yes, Kaddish de Rabbanan, which is Kaddish.
It's Kaddish with an extra bit.
Specific to, with the extra
But
bit.
Rabbi, it can also, you can use Kaddish de Rabbanan, and as I understand it, for mourners also.
Absolutely, that's
so
correct.
so it's yes, you can. So that's a good thing.
And that's a whole other teaching. Maybe we'll do one night on the Kaddish. When its origins might have been as a sanctification of God after study. But certainly there were people in the room that after you study who had already passed on. Right. So we're pulling all of that with us and remembering those as well who are close to us, have been close to us. Eve, you have something to add?
I was going to say, I'm not one of these people who sees through the other worlds, but there may be some of you who do, who may see who else is davening with us and saying Kaddish with us when we rise.
So, Slicha, I'm not going to rise. Only because then I cut off my head with my from the camera. So I want to invite us all to identify someone to whom we want to dedicate the carrying forth of a teaching from tonight, and whose name and whose memory and then, of course, all others who you wish to say Kaddish for, but allow yourself.
You're somehow too far from the mic.
Allow yourself to be very specific. Okay? Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. Everybody please unmute if you're going to be saying Kaddish with me. Let's start from the beginning. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. Bialma tivra
kirkutei, yamlik malchutei, b'chayechon, u'biyomechon, u'chaye dechol Yisrael, ba'agala, u'vizman kariv, yemru amen.
Yehei
Shemei Rabba mivarach le'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach, yishtabach, yitbar, yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar, v'yitale, v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha, rikhu leila, mikol birchata, v'shirata, tushvichata, v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma, v'yemru amen. Al Yisrael, ve'al Rabbanan, ve'al Talmidion, ve'al kol Talmidei, Talmidehon, ve'al kol man daskim be'orataita, Divatra Hadein Bedi Vekol Atar Ve'atar Yehi Lechon Ulechon Shalama Rabba China Chista V'Ramachan V'Chayin Arakin Mizona Ficha Ufurkana Min Kodom Avuhom Di Vishimaya V'Emru Amen.
Yehi
Yehi Shalama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chaim
V'chaim
Tovim Aleinu
Aleinu
Yal
V'Al
Kol
Kol
Yisrael
Yisrael
V'Emru Amen.
Oseh
Ose Shalom Bimromav
Shalom
Beramahav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Emru
V'Al Kol
Amen.
Yisrael Yimru. Amen. Last night was the 31st day of the Omer.
Wait, see, I lost you.
Janice, we
לשם ייחוד, קודש בריחו שכינתי, הנני מוכן ומזומן, נקיים מצוות עשה, של ספירת העומר, של ספירת העומר, שבע שבתות, תמימות תהיינה, שבע שבתות, תמימות תהיינה, ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו רוח העולם, אשר קידשנו, במצוותיו ציוונו, על ספירת העומר, על ספירת העומר, היום, שניים ושלושים יום, שהם 4 שבועות ו4 ימים בעומר. And the quality for today is netzach shebehod, endurance within presence. Na 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 na, ya na 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 na, ah na 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 na, ah na 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 na.
thank you, Janice, for blessing this room. Thank you, Eve. Thank you, all of us, for gathering in this holy community once again. This was a special, special night. I've shared with you before that one of my go-to books is Counting the Omer by another one of Reb Zalman's Musmachot, Rabbi Min Kantrowitz.
Oh,
And Rebbe Min gives us a nice kavanah for today. Netzach Shebahod prompts us to continually focus energy in small steps toward contact with the One. Many spiritual practices help us do this: daily meditation, keeping kosher, commemorating a yahrzeit of loved ones' blessings before, after meals, and the 49 days of counting the Omer are a few examples. So here's the kavanah to take us through this day. Meditate on your own footsteps towards a spiritual goal.
Mm.
Janice, my friend, would you take us out with that little nigun at the end of
Hello.
the beautiful melody?
Judith, it's Mark Wilding. Oh, hi, Mark. Okay, wait.
Na 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 na.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, everyone. And as you make your way out,
Ya da 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 de da dum. Ya da 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 de da dum. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. I da di da da ya da 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 de da dum. I da 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 di da dum. I da 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 da. Ya da 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 ya da da da. Da 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 di da da. Da 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 di da di da da. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Ah, Lila Tov, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Eve, why don't you stay on just for a moment while everybody leaves?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eve.